video for helping us learn the order of the books of the New Testament. All right, they all have actions as well. So if you'll come over here, camera, this is my day, my Sunday at church, and I'm going to talk to you about what I did Sunday at church, coming out of the parking lot and then going to a wrestling meet. And by the time we get done with our story, you'll know the books of the New Testament. So first of all, we're going to start out with at church where the pastor preached about the Gospels, the stories about Jesus written by 4 guys who knew him. Okay, come back here for a second, Jesse. All right, so Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are the ones who wrote the 4 Gospels, but we're going to have some actions to help you remember those 4 guys, okay? So Matthew was a tax collector, so imagine yourself with a table, and you just have piles of coins, okay? These are my piles of coins that I'm making. So Matthew, okay? Mark is a fun book to read because it is action-packed. It's like a little action hero. And he's just going everywhere immediately, telling all this action story. And if you think about him just bouncing off the walls, going every which direction, when you bounce off the walls, you leave marks, right, on the walls? That's how we're going to remember Mark. So we've got Matthew with his piles of coins, and then Mark, the action figure, going everywhere. All right? After Mark comes Luke, and Luke was a doctor. So I want you to imagine a doctor wearing his white coat with a stethoscope around his neck. Okay, hold on to that stethoscope with your hands. That's going to be our action for Luke. Okay, Matthew, Mark, Luke. Now, if that one's a little hard to remember, the Luke, take the stethoscope. Don't do this in real life because it will hurt your ears. If you have it in your ears, you know how it's used to listen to the heartbeat? It's kind of a funny sound. I want you to imagine speaking into that stethoscope and saying, Luke. Some of you will get that reference. Some of you won't. Luke. Okay? Matthew, Mark, Luke, or Luke. And then John. John was probably the youngest disciple, and he was so confident in the fact that Jesus loved him that he referred to himself later as the disciple Jesus loved. So I want you to make a little heart and think about John that way, okay? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Okay, those are our 4 Gospels. Next, after I heard that sermon about those 4 guys, I went out into my car and drove down the street and bam! I drove over an axe. Axe. It's spelled a little differently, isn't it? A-C-T-X-S. Axe. Okay, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. This time we're going to have an axe. All right? Now, after that, we went, you can remember this one of 2 ways. Depends on how much action you need. If you want to remember drinking an RC Cola, that I drank an RC Cola in my car as I drove along the road, that will give you the next 3. Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians. But another way that you can remember that, it just doesn't fit into my wrestling match very well, is to think of a Roman soldier, and you can put your hands on your hips and be still like a Roman soldier. And then if you think about Roman architecture, we have almost, I don't know if it's true for everyone, but when I think of Roman architecture, I think of those columns at the front of the buildings, these columns that were big support beams. There are 3 types of columns. You don't need to know this, but there were Doric columns, Ionic columns, and Corinthian columns. Doric were really boring. The Corinthians were really fancy. That's your carved leaves and flowers at the top, okay? So if you can think of the Corinthian columns after Romans, you have to picture 2 of them, 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians, okay? So maybe when we were going to our wrestling meet, we met a guard at the front door, Roman guard, and we walked between 2 columns, 1st and 2nd Corinthian columns. Okay, After that, we go into the wrestling meet, and our group has decided that they should eat popcorn for lunch. Do you ever get away with eating popcorn for lunch? Our group did that, and this is going to give us the next four. GEPC, group eat potato chips. The only tricky part with this one is that PH doesn't say P, it says F, like an F. So you're going to have to remember that that potato is actually a flipped over potato chip, okay? You can think about it, or popcorn, you can think about it flipping, okay? So group is Galatians, eat is Ephesians, flip it over for Philippians, and either chips or popcorn, okay? All right, after our group ate potato chips, I heard the crowd and the cheerleaders at this wrestling meet, and it was the strangest thing. They were saying, Thes, Thes, Tim, Tim, Ty. Thes, Thes, Tim, Tim, Ty. Can you say that? Thes, Thes, Tim, Tim, Ty. Those are our next four. They stand for 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, 1st and 2nd Timothy, and Titus. Thes, Thes, Tim, Tim, Ty. All right, next. All right, here's the wrestling match. We finally get to it. There were two boys wrestling, Philemon and James. Do you want to know who won? It was Philemon. He bruised James. Now look at this. He bruised. Sounds like Hebrews. Philemon, Hebrews, James. Philemon won the wrestling match. Philemon, Hebrews, James. All right, let's review what we've got so far with this poster. You do the actions there at home, okay? Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts. Remember, I ran over that Acts with my car. Now think of the guard, Romans, and going through the two pillars, 1st and 2nd Corinthians. Now we're going to eat lunch. Our group eats potato chips, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, and Colossians. Then the cheerleaders were saying Thes, Thes, Tim, Tim, Ty, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, 1st and 2nd Timothy, Titus. Then the actual wrestling match, Philemon, Hebrews, James. We're almost done. I went home after that, and my family and I got into our PJs. PJs are our next clue. And we have two parents. That's how you remember how many P's there are. 1 Peter, 2 Peter. Then there were 3 kids all dressed in the same PJs. Those stand for 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. Parents weren't very creative when they named these kids John, John, and John. 1st, 2nd, 3rd John. And there's a little baby. He got a different name. His name is Jude. Hi, Jude. 1st and 2nd Peter, 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, Jude. And then our family had devotions before bed. And we are reading in Revelation. That's the last book in the Bible. All right. Let's see if we can go through them again. Do the actions. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, flip it over, Colossians, Thes, Tim, Tim, Ty, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, 1st and 2nd Timothy, Titus. Who won the match? Philemon, Hebrews, James. Let's go home and get ready for bed. 1st and 2nd Peter, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, baby Jude, and we read Revelations. And you've got them. Bye.